I'm standing outside the state parliamentary building for the state of Victoria of Australia here in Melbourne. This is the home of the cabinet for the state of Victoria, as well as the office of the Premier. But it's also the location and the office where former Premier Daniel Andrews made all his decisions about COVID-19. Now, Premier Daniel Andrews' approach to dealing with COVID-19 was amongst the most draconian and rights destructive we have seen in the world, second only to that of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Now, this approach by Premier Daniel Andrews was draconian. It's destroyed the civil liberties and human rights of Victorians to move about freely. He used the police force in brutal fashion against dissenters to the COVID-19 narrative that he was putting out and propagating. But it was the location here behind me where he orchestrated a draconian and destructive approach to mitigating COVID-19. A strange part of the story is that when you examine how the Jacinda Ardern government responded to COVID-19 and the greatly draconian measures that they enforced, if you look at what they did and look at how Daniel Andrews approached dealing with COVID, you'll see two very, very eerily similar approaches to dealing with COVID-19. Both draconian, both that destroyed civil liberties and human rights, destroyed businesses, economies, and literally killed people. And so we've got to ask ourselves, how is it possible that these two different governments acted in a very, very similar way? Now, there's another strange story within this story, and that is the story of Professor Tony Blakely of Melbourne and Otago universities. Now, Professor Tony Blakely was the orchestrator, one of the main orchestrators of Daniel Andrews' approach to dealing with COVID. He advocated for very, very harsh measures against the people of Victoria. He advocated for rights and civil liberties destruction, and he advocated measures that were not supported by the science, in the same way New Zealand responded to the COVID-19 threat. Now, there's another story within that story within the story, and that is this, is that the same man that destroyed civil liberties in Melbourne, Victoria, and across the state of Victoria is also the chair of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into COVID-19 in New Zealand. This Royal Commission of Inquiry is meant to investigate the processes and the decisions made by the New Zealand Labour government under Ardern in its response to COVID-19. This is very, very strange that this Professor Tony Blakely is the chair of this committee. Why is that? Well, obviously he was the architect for the civil liberties destruction in Melbourne and in Victoria, but he's also an ex-WHO, World Health Organization consultant, a university affiliate with Otago University that has received significant funding from the Labour government of New Zealand and also, of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But he's also an open advocate for harsh measures to deal with any such thing as COVID-19. That's a big problem, because when we look at autonomy and independence and his ability to deliver the citizens of New Zealand a true and honest in-depth inquiry, one would have to question whether that is possible. And this is something that we must consider, and I would like to suggest that we cannot possibly trust a man to be in charge of this inquiry with his history. It's very disturbing to think that he's in charge of it. But there's another concerning feature to the story, and it is this, is that Professor Tony Blakely and others like him, Professor Michael Baker, Professor Sean Hendy, and Ashley Bloomfield, are still in positions of influence as to how the New Zealand government is going to respond in the future to any pandemic threat. I'd like to advocate here and now that the New Zealand Citizen COVID-19 inquiry is going to be our vehicle and the vehicle to gain truth, to seek justice, and hopefully reconciliation.